Okay, so one more time, you either have a quiz tomorrow, which none of you do because it's A-Day, or you have it on Monday, which you do. It will be a 4-question quiz where we talk about the vertex form, finding the vertexes, or writing the equation in vertex form. So I would go back and watch lesson 16 again, because 15 and 17 are the same thing, which is what we're doing here. Then you're going to have 2 questions. One that just says, find your x-intercepts, or use the quadratic to find your x's, which is just the portion that I'm going to show now. Your last question will be very similar to the classwork that we do today, which is graphing this and then answering questions based off of that graph. For some reason, some of us are still having trouble doing the order of operations when we substitute this in. So I've got my A, I've got my B, and I've got my C. C is always the constant. Just by looking at this, what type of parabola will I have? Will my parabola open up? Will my parabola open down, and why?
Down because the leading coefficient is negative.
It's going to open down because the leading coefficient, my A term, is negative. Anytime that A term is negative, the parabola will open down. It will look like an umbrella. Everybody with me? So if you're graphing this and it's like, wow, it's a U, stop. You screwed up. So now we've got x equals negative b, which means the opposite of b, which is 4, plus or minus the square root of negative, or b squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a. Questions on how I substituted that in? Most of you got to that part. And then we lost our minds. Because you didn't put these in parentheses. A negative 4 times a negative 4 has to be positive. So if you're saying, man, Mr. H, it's a negative, think about it. What does squaring a number mean? It means the number by itself times itself. That gives me positive 16. Negative 4 times negative 2 is positive 8. Positive 8 times negative 1 is negative 8. All divided by negative 4. So now I have 4 plus or minus the square root of 8, all divided by negative 4. That gives me x equals 4 plus or minus, round to the nearest hundredth. Okay, if you do not round to the nearest hundredth on your quiz, you better believe that I will mark it wrong. You're all in algebra. Like, I don't think rounding is too much of an expectation. I mean, is that fair? Like, we should be able to round to the nearest hundred, yes? Okay. So now, and this was a conversation I had with Izzy. If you put this into your calculator, 4 plus 2 and 8300ths divided by negative 4, the calculator will do order of operations, which means it's doing 2 and 8300ths divided by negative 4 before it adds them. That will not give you the right answer. So when we do this, 4 plus 2 and 8300ths, press enter, then divide by negative 4. Rounding to the nearest hundredth leaves me an x of 1 and 71/100ths. Therefore, my x-intercept is there, and my other x-intercept, 4 minus 2 and 8300ths divided by 4, leaves me with negative 29/100ths, comma 0. Questions on how we get those x-intercepts? Okay. So now, what I would suggest is we've done this before. We have graphed using the factored form. I've given you a list of steps. Find the x-intercepts. Find your line of symmetry. Find the vertex. Find the y-intercept. Find the point of symmetry, or the point of reflection. Everybody remember that? You might want to get those out, because you're doing the same thing, except you're using this equation. Okay, I'm going to give you about 6 more minutes to do this. If you're watching the video, you're probably going to want to skip ahead until you see me come back up here and start talking again. Man, if you guys start talking, just know that you're on video. So you know. So don't. If you start talking bad about me, don't use any cuss words. That'd be me. That'd be bad. Fair enough?
Yeah.
Okay. You can think them in your head though. Okay, so here's what we know so far. We have our graph, and I'm going to extend it this way so that we can have a nice 1, 2, 1, negative. We know that we're at negative 29 hundredths and negative 1 and 71 hundredths. Okay, is everybody good with that? So now, to find the line of symmetry, we take my x-intercepts and we add them together. And we divide by 2. That gives me negative 2 divided by 2. So we know that somewhere at negative 1 is our vertex. Have I lost anybody on that point? See that there? There we go. Yes? So now with that negative 1, where do we substitute that? There. Into my x's. So this negative 1 goes here. So now I've got negative 2 times negative 1 squared minus 4 times negative 1 minus 1 equals f of x. What does that really equal? Because f of x is really just a placeholder. What is that f of x? Y. We're solving for the y. Now there's 2 ways to do this. As these get harder, your calculator is the best way, so pick up your calculator. Follow along with me. Negative 2, parenthesis, negative 1, parenthesis, press your squared button. Then minus 4. Mr. H, why can't we use a negative? Because we're taking this term and subtracting it from this term. So you have to use the minus. 4, parenthesis, -1, parenthesis, -1. You should have one singular line looking like so. You should have one singular line looking like so. Press enter. Everybody should have the same small answer. 1. Is there anybody who does not have a 1 that would like me to come back and help them on the calculator? So I now know that my y is 1. Okay? Listen, if it's small like this, use your head. -2 times -1 squared is 1. Minus times a minus is +4 minus 1. That gives me -2 plus 4 minus 1. That's +2 minus 1, which is how I get my 1. So now I have my line of symmetry, which is -1, +1. Have I lost anybody yet? So now we're looking for our y-intercept. This is the possible easiest thing to do, because I've already told you, if you have, bless you, if you have this in standard form, your constant is your y-intercept. Okay? I already know that it's at -1. I already know that it's going to be down here at -1, but how can I prove it? Well, we know my x has to be 0. So -2 times 0 squared minus 4 times 0 minus 1. Why does this work? Because 0 times anything is 0. 0 times anything is 0. So really what we're left over with is 0 minus 1, which is how I get my -1. I've substituted in 0 for x. That leaves me my -1. Everybody with me? Okay? This is one place away, which means it has to be one place away. There's my graph. Everything else about this lesson is intuitive based off of what we already know about our graphs. Now, there are two things that we need to know. The words domain and the word range. Domains represent a certain letter, and I've talked about this before. What letter do the domains represent? You've got two guesses. I mean, really. What do you think? Yeah, the domains are my x values. Most of the graphs that we have dealt with, whether it's throwing a ball, a rocket going up, dropping something from a roof, we're dealing with time and we're dealing with height. Most of our times are my x values. So if it said, what does the domain represent? You would say it was representing the time, whether it's in seconds, minutes, whatever. The height, which is usually my y value, would then be the ranges. So what does the range represent? It represents the height. You need to know how to analyze the graph. Okay, so if I said, okay, we're throwing a ball. This is a horrible example, but where would we be starting throwing the ball from? Well, -1 in 7100 seconds and -21 or -29 hundredths of a second. Is that possible? Well, no, but you've got the idea. How high does the ball go? 1 foot. Okay, it's analyzing the graph once you have it graphed. Questions? You will see questions like this in lesson 17 on your test. So